A homeless veteran stood trial, dismissed, treated like no one, but when the judge heard his name, everything went still. Within seconds, the entire courtroom rose to their feet, not out of duty, but out of honor. In that moment, the past spoke louder than any verdict. It was a gray Thursday morning when James was led into courtroom for B of the Davidson County Courthouse. Hands cuffed, clothes tattered, beard overgrown, the few onlookers whispered and glanced sideways, some with pity, others with contempt. He didn't meet their eyes. His focus was somewhere else, distant, buried beneath layers of memory and loss. The charge was simple: trespassing. He'd been found sleeping on the porch of a suburban home in East Nashville, claiming it used to be his. No ID, no lawyer. The court-appointed attorney barely remembered his name and had stopped asking questions when James answered everything with a strange kind of silence, not defiance, but weariness. The judge skimmed the file, expecting the usual, another lost soul, broken by the system, cycling through the courts. But then he paused. His eyes stopped at one line, and a muscle in his jaw twitched. Slowly, he looked up and asked, "Sir, can you confirm your full name?" James didn't speak right away. When he finally did, his voice was cracked and quiet, but firm. "Major James Daniel Halbrook, United States Marine Corps." The words hung in the air like thunder. A long, still pause. Then, something changed. One by one, people in the room stood. The bailiff, the clerk. A woman in the back wiped her eyes. Even the prosecuting attorney, hardened by years of courtroom battles, rose silently. They weren't reacting to the man in chains. They were standing for the name, a name they hadn't heard in decades, one that carried stories whispered in military circles and history books, a name long thought lost to war. And in that moment, everything shifted. Beneath the Jefferson Street Bridge, where the Cumberland River curved like a question mark through the heart of Nashville, a man slept beside a torn duffel bag and a dented thermos. His spot, a patch of cracked concrete between two graffiti-tagged columns, was known among the city's invisible as the bunker. Not for safety, but for how completely it hid you from the world. James blended in perfectly with the shadows. His coat was a faded army green, patched with duct tape. His boots didn't match. On colder nights, he talked to someone named Ranger, though no one ever saw a dog. He carried himself with a kind of stillness that made the other homeless men uneasy. Not crazy exactly, but like he'd seen too much to bother explaining anything anymore. Most days, he walked the same loop, from the bridge to the mission house, then back through the alley behind the Greyhound station, always avoiding eye contact, always clutching the same notebook he never opened. The city passed him like wind over a stone. Once, a young outreach volunteer tried to ask his name. He simply nodded and muttered, "Doesn't matter." When she pushed, he looked at her with eyes so sharp, so filled with something ancient and broken, that she backed away without another word. At night, James stared up at the underbelly of the bridge, as if it held the sky. Sometimes he whispered things: coordinates, call signs, fragments of radio chatter. If anyone listened closely, they'd hear the ghosts of war living inside him. But no one stayed close enough. Until one rainy Tuesday, when a flash of red brake lights cut through the mist near the bridge entrance. Tires screeched. A silver Honda stopped inches from James as he crossed the street, seemingly unaware of traffic. A woman jumped out, furious at first, then startled, not by what he'd done, but by how he looked. She was in her early 60s, holding a tote full of medical textbooks. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked, breathless. He didn't answer, just stared past her at the hospital sign across the river. "Do you need help?" She tried again. James looked at her, really looked, then said something she couldn't quite understand. "Used to fly over that hill, Bravo 6, we never made it back." Then he turned and walked back under the bridge like he hadn't spoken at all. But something in the woman's face shifted. She didn't leave. She followed him slowly, cautiously, like someone approaching a sacred ruin. And that was the moment things started to change. For the first time in years, someone saw more than a shadow. The woman reached into her coat and pulled out a badge. Donna Michaels, RN, retired VA hospital. And her voice trembled as she whispered, "James, is that you?" Donna hadn't planned to drive that route. Her usual way home from the pharmacy was quicker, less tangled in the downtown chaos. But the rain had made her uneasy, and she'd taken the river road instead, her wipers barely keeping up with the downpour. That's when she saw him, that man, stepping out from nowhere, soaked, unfazed, moving like a ghost through headlights. She slammed the brakes. The car skidded slightly. Her heart pounded as she flung the door open. "Jesus, are you all right?" she shouted, rushing toward him, her voice cutting through the hiss of rain. The man didn't flinch. He was staring at the hospital across the river, lips moving in some kind of code. Donna had worked with dementia patients before. She recognized the murmur of memory overriding reality. But there was something else in his stance, something too precise, like a soldier trying to hold formation in the middle of a storm. He said something about flying, about a mission gone wrong, then turned and walked away like none of it mattered. Donna stood in the street, rain soaking her hair and coat, torn between fear and something deeper, recognition. She followed him. The edge of the bridge, she found his makeshift shelter, tarps tied down with old shoelaces, milk crates stacked like furniture, and there he was, sitting cross-legged with a piece of string in his hands, tying knots with methodical precision. A ritual, a rhythm. She didn't speak right away. He glanced at her but didn't speak, just nodded once, like she was another passing shadow. "My name's Donna," she said quietly, her voice softening. "I used to work at the VA." That got his attention. Barely, but enough. He paused mid-knot, his eyes flickering with something. Confusion, maybe, or memory. She took a slow step forward, then pulled her old VA badge from her coat pocket, the one she never really stopped carrying. "I saw a lot of men come back, broken," she said, "but I never saw one forget how to survive." The silence stretched. Finally he spoke. "You were at Fort Campbell," he said, more a statement than a question. "Second floor, burn unit, April '98. Donna's breath caught. How? He didn't answer, just looked at her like she was a piece of a dream he'd half forgotten. Then, softly, he said, "You brought me lemon drops. Said they helped with nausea." She couldn't speak. Her eyes welled up, but she blinked it back. "I remember," he added, "because it was the last time someone was kind without needing a reason." Donna sat down across from him, ignoring the wet concrete, ignoring everything, and in that quiet moment, with the rain slowing and the city breathing just out of reach, something between them settled. Not familiarity, not yet, but recognition, a bridge built from fragments of memory, and a name she hadn't dared say aloud for years. "James, is that really you?" she whispered, her voice trembling, but he didn't answer. Not yet. He just stared at the sky, blinking like it might offer a sign. Donna didn't push him to talk. After that night under the bridge, she just started showing up, sometimes with a sandwich, sometimes with clean socks, always with a gentle presence that asked nothing in return. It took 3 days before James finally spoke again. "Shelter's safer when it rains hard," he muttered, eyes on the river. But they asked too many questions. Still, he went. The Jefferson Street mission wasn't much, a red brick building tucked behind a pawn shop, with flickering lights and peeling linoleum. But it had hot soup cots, and a staff that didn't flinch when people walked in smelling like the street. Donna knew the director, a tall woman named Carla, who greeted James like she'd seen 1,000 versions of him, and still believed everyone could be saved. They gave him a cot near the back wall. He didn't sleep right away. Instead, he sat up and scanned the room like it was hostile territory, calculating exits, watching the way shadows moved. The other men gave him space. Something about him, the way he carried silence like a shield, made them nervous. That night, as the room quieted and snores filled the air, James whispered to no one. "Alpha Team never radioed back. We were told to wait. We waited too long." A younger man, in the next cot, maybe mid-30s, leaned over. "You served?" he asked cautiously. James didn't look at him. "We all served something." The man didn't press, just nodded and rolled over. But later, when most were asleep, he heard James again, this time clearer. "Operation Steel Mirage, Delta Route. 48 hours with no cover. I carried him back myself." The words didn't make sense, not fully, but they carried weight. War names, battle rhythm, codes from another world. In the morning, Carla brought Donna into the office. "He's not just any vet," she said quietly. "I ran his name from what little he gave me. Donna, if this is real, he's not just someone who served, he's someone who vanished." Donna's hands trembled slightly as she held the paper. Carla slid across the desk. An old missing persons report, military classified. Status, presumed dead. She stared at the grainy photo. It was him, younger, cleaner shaven, but unmistakable. "James D. Halbrook," she read aloud, almost reverently. Silver star, Purple heart, last seen 2004. Carla looked at her carefully. What the hell is a war hero doing freezing under a bridge for 2 decades? Donna didn't have an answer, but deep down, she felt the shape of it forming, not just tragedy, but choice. James hadn't been lost, he had hidden, and the real question wasn't what happened to him. It was what had made him walk away from everything: medals, honor, his own name, and never look back. It was just before dawn when James left the shelter. No one saw him go, not even Donna. He moved like he had in another life, silent, deliberate, unseen. The rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened. Under the orange glow of the street, he didn't walk randomly. There was intent in every step, like he was being drawn somewhere. The house sat on a quiet block in East Nashville, 2-story brick, with white shutters and a small flag mounted near the porch. Neat, familiar. James stood at the edge of the yard, staring like it was a mirage. His hands trembled slightly. He crossed the lawn. The porch creaked as he stepped onto it. He sat down, right on the doormat, like he belonged there, not in defiance, but in certainty. The cushions on the porch swing had changed, but the chain still squeaked in the breeze, same as before. His fingers brushed the wood rail, tracing a spot where he remembered carving a date, a lifetime ago. The homeowner, a woman in her 40s, with a startled expression and a phone already in hand, came to the window. "Sir, what are you doing?" "I'm calling the police." James didn't react, just looked at her with sad, hollow eyes. "This was my home," he said. "I lived here, with Marlena, the swings still off-center." That was enough. Minutes later, flashing lights painted the house in red and blue. The officer approached cautiously, a young man, polite but tense, hand near his holster. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stand up and put your hands where I can see them." James complied, slow and steady. He didn't argue, didn't resist. As the cuffs clicked shut, he simply said, "You ever have a place you never stopped hearing, even after it wasn't yours anymore?" The officer didn't answer. He just led him to the cruiser dot at the station. They asked his name, he gave none. No ID, no next of kin. The officer wrote down John Doe, added trespassing, and signed the intake form with a sigh. Another broken man with nowhere to go. Another court date, another forgotten story. But in the back of the holding cell, James sat calmly, almost peacefully, as if the gears of something larger had finally begun to turn again. He closed his eyes and mouthed the names of streets long paved over by time. Then, softly, he whispered, "I'm ready." And as the officer walked past, James looked up and said, not to him exactly, but to the air, to the world, to whatever was listening, "They buried me once. Let's see what happens when I stand." The case was scheduled for a Thursday morning, a quick slot on a crowded docket. Just another trespassing charge in a city too full of them. The clerk typed John Doe into the register, flagged as homeless, mentally unstable, no representation, routine, forgettable. But when Donna heard, she didn't hesitate. She marched into the courthouse the morning before and demanded to speak with someone, anyone, who could slow things down. "He's not who you think he is," she told the overwhelmed receptionist. "He's someone you should remember." They gave her 5 minutes with the court-appointed attorney, a man named Russ Hagen who looked more tired than skeptical. Donna handed him a file, the missing persons report, the military commendations, a printed copy of an old news article, with a grainy photo of James, in uniform. Russ barely blinked. "This guy's been missing for 20 years, he muttered. "You're saying he's been living under a bridge in my city this whole time?" Donna nodded. "Not living, surviving." Russ flipped through the documents, again, then leaned back. "If he is who you say he is, this isn't a trespassing case, it's a damn headline." "But he won't talk," Donna added. "He won't defend himself." Russ sighed. "Then we do it for him." The next morning, James arrived in court wearing the same tattered coat. The bailiff offered him a donated blazer. He refused. "This is who I am now," he said quietly. His hands trembled slightly, but his back stayed straight. Russ stood beside him, armed with evidence that no one had asked for. "We'll plead not guilty," he said. James didn't respond. As the judge entered and the courtroom settled, Donna slipped into the back row. She held her breath as the case was called. State of Tennessee versus John Doe. Russ stood. "Honor, my client has identified himself, and I believe the court will want to hear it." The judge barely glanced up. "We'll get to that. For now, no, sir," Russ interrupted, unusually firm. "You'll want to hear it now." The judge raised an eyebrow, irritated, then nodded. "Very well. Mr. Doe, state your name." James hesitated, just for a moment. Then, with eyes steady and voice level, he said, "Major James Daniel Halbrook, serial number 209714236, United States Marine Corps, retired." The judge's hands froze mid-page. Silence fell over the room like a weighted blanket. The court reporter stopped typing. The bailiff shifted. A beat passed. Then another dot, and then the judge said softly, almost to himself, "That name, that can't be." No one moved, no one breathed, until the prosecutor stood slowly, eyes wide, and said, "Your Honor, I believe we need a recess." But before the judge could respond, someone in the gallery stood up, then another, and another. No one told them to. They stood not out of protocol but out of memory, out of reverence. Out of truth finally uncovered. The silence didn't break, it transformed. People stood without speaking, as if their bodies remembered something their minds had buried. Court clerks, attorneys, a man from the back row who'd come to fight a parking ticket, all frozen in a strange, collective reverence. The judge, an older man with silver-rimmed glasses and decades of rulings behind him, stared at James like seeing a ghost. Slowly, he removed his glasses, folded them, and placed them on the bench. "Major Halbrook," he said at last, voice softer now, "where have you been?" James didn't answer. He didn't look away either. It was like he was waiting for someone else to speak first. The courtroom buzzed to life, whispers flying like sparks. "That's the guy from Fallujah. Didn't he save a whole unit? I thought he died overseas." The prosecutor shuffled papers in disbelief. "Your Honor, I need to confirm this identity." "This can't be." Russ interrupted, holding up the evidence. "It's him. Fingerprints match. Military records. Missing for 20 years, declared deceased in 2006. Donna watched from the back, tears streaming freely now, not because James had returned, but because someone had finally seen him. The judge cleared his throat. "Major Halbrook, this court owes you more than due process. We owe you an apology." James raised a hand. "Don't," he said. "Don't turn me into something I'm not. I didn't come back for glory." "Then why did you come back?" the judge asked. And it wasn't courtroom drama, it was personal, honest. The question of a man who had once worn the same uniform. James didn't speak right away. His eyes drifted to the flag in the corner of the room, then to the people still standing. "There's a boy," he said finally, voice hoarse. "Lives in that house now. The one I sat on. I saw him playing in the yard last month. Same age as mine would have been." He waved at me, just waved. I hadn't seen a wave like that in 20 years. The judge swallowed hard. "No one moved," James continued. "I realized I'd been waiting for someone to pull me out, but no one was coming. So I came to find out what was left of me, and I found that porch." The weight of his words hung in the air, real, raw, not rehearsed, not cinematic. Just a man, broken and still standing. And then the judge stood too, slowly, deliberately, followed again by everyone else. Not out of sympathy, not out of protocol, but because something sacred had entered the room. Not a man above the rest, but a man who had been to hell and come back, not seeking justice, but peace. The courthouse receded. The faces, the whispers, the standing ovation, all of it faded into a blur as James sat on the bench outside the holding cell later that afternoon. Eyes unfocused, lost in a current only he could feel. He was no longer in Nashville. In his mind, he was back in the sand. Fallujah, 2004. It had started as a simple recon. 6 men, 1 vehicle, 24 hours. Then everything unraveled. An IED took out their Humvee. 2 men gone instantly. The others scattered, wounded, bleeding into a night that never ended. James dragged his radio operator half a mile through open fire. Carried another soldier on his back across a dried canal. He remembered the smell, burning rubber, diesel, and something worse. He'd held a perimeter alone for 6 hours, 1 bullet left in the chamber. The evac never came. Eventually, he stopped expecting it. When they finally pulled him out, weeks later, he was half mad with infection and grief. He'd watched too many men die. Too many mistakes. Too many orders followed too late. The commendations came. The Silver Star, the Bronze. The papers called him a hero, but none of it could touch the guilt. back home, everything felt off. The noise of traffic sounded like gunfire. Fireworks turned to sirens in his ears. He couldn't sleep without the taste of blood in his mouth. Marlene, his wife, tried. God, she tried. But he wasn't the man she'd married anymore. Their son was only 8. He used to leave toy soldiers on James's pillow. One night, James crushed them in his sleep. So one morning before sunrise, he packed a duffel and disappeared. Not out of cowardice, out of mercy. He thought the further he went, the less they'd hurt, the less they'd remember. He lived in motels, shelters, then nowhere. The years blurred. His name became a burden. His medals felt like jokes. He stopped looking people in the eye. And yet, that little boy on the porch had cracked something open. A child who smiled at him like he wasn't a ghost. That one wave, it had hit harder than any explosion. Back in the cell, James wiped his eyes. No tears came. He didn't cry anymore. He simply breathed, slowly, as if each inhale had to be earned. The past wasn't done with him. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't there to haunt him anymore. Maybe it had followed him not to punish, but to carry him home. And in that thought, for the first time in decades, he felt something he hadn't dared touch. The faintest outline of peace. By the time James returned to the courtroom, word had spread. It started with a reporter who'd overheard the name, then a veterans group tweet. By morning, there were faces in the hallway who didn't belong there. Older men with worn caps, women clutching faded photographs, strangers standing shoulder to shoulder in a kind of hushed solidarity. The judge noticed it too. When he took the bench, his eyes swept the room, softer now. Less courtroom, more cathedral. Russ leaned over to James. "You're not invisible anymore." James didn't reply. He sat with his shoulders straight, hands folded, not proud, not defensive, just present, like a man ready to face something, not escape it. The judge opened the file again but didn't look at it. "Major Halbrook," he said gently, "before this court proceeds, I believe there are people who would like to speak." The first voice came from the back. "I served with him," said a man in a weathered Marine's jacket. "Felucia, he pulled my brother out of the fire." Then another. "He trained us in Quantico, taught us how to lead without breaking people down." Then Donna, quiet but steady. "He saved my patient's life and never took credit." One by one, they spoke. Not to defend his actions but to remind everyone of who he had been and what his silence had cost him. The stories wove together like a tapestry: valor, loss, heartbreak, a mosaic of a man broken not by weakness, but by carrying too much for too long. James sat through it all, unmoving, jaw clenched tight. Every word was a thread tugging at something raw inside him. Finally, the judge stood. "In this courtroom," he said slowly, "we uphold the law, but today, we're reminded that justice is more than rules. It is memory, it is mercy, it is knowing when silence deserves reverence." He looked around. No one spoke. No one dared. "Charges against Major Halbrook are dismissed." A beat of stillness. Then the sound of chairs scraping back. The entire room rising again. Some with hands over hearts, others with bowed heads. Not because they were told, but because it felt wrong to remain seated. James stood too. Not to acknowledge them, but because standing was the only thing left to do. And for that brief, fragile moment, no one saw a homeless man. No one saw a criminal. They saw a man who had once disappeared into war and had finally returned after the courtroom emptied. James didn't leave right away. He stood by the window in the hallway, watching people drift out like clouds after a storm. Some stopped to shake his hand. Others simply nodded, as if words would have cheapened something sacred. Donna waited by the bench near the exit, arms crossed loosely, eyes never leaving him. Russ offered him a ride, but James shook his head. "I need to walk," he said. "Feel the ground under me." So he walked down the courthouse steps, into the cool afternoon light, along streets that once ignored him. The city looked the same. Buses groaned, horns honked. Someone played guitar near the park, but James moved through it differently now. He wasn't trying to disappear anymore. At the edge of the river, he stopped. That same spot near the bridge where it all started. The wind rippled over the water like a flag he once saluted. He sat on a bench, pulled the old notebook from his coat, and opened it for the first time in years. Inside were sketches, maps, names, handwritten letters. The handwriting was shaky, sometimes illegible, but one name appeared again and again: Eli, his son. James hadn't seen him in over 2 decades, didn't know where he lived. or even if he'd remember his father. But now, for the first time, he let the thought settle. Maybe it wasn't too late to try. A voice behind him broke the silence, still tying knots. He turned. Donna, still carrying lemon drops. He replied. She smiled, sat beside him without asking. They watched the river roll on in silence. After a while, she asked, "What will you do now?" James didn't answer immediately. He looked at the sky, as if listening for something beyond sound. Then he said, "Start from wherever I am. Just start." He didn't need fanfare. He didn't want redemption. But maybe, with time, he could find a new kind of service, not in uniform, not in war, but in the simple act of showing up, as a man, as a father, as someone who had finally remembered his own name. And that was the verdict that mattered, not written on a court document, but carved into the soul. You are not forgotten. You are not broken beyond return. You are still here. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing your thoughts. Where are you watching from? What part of James's journey resonated most with you? We'd love to hear your voice. Every story deserves to be seen.